The courtroom falls silent as Zora Williams takes the stand. At just 17, her confident stride contrasts with the bruises still visible on her wrists from last week's arrest. Officer Brandon Miller shifts uncomfortably in his seat as she begins to speak. Before I was dragged out of Mercy Hospital in handcuffs, I had just finished assisting Dr. Eleanor Chen with a bilateral lung transplant that saved Congressman Robert Wilson's life. The jury gasps. No one suspected this teenager in a hospital waiting room was anything but trouble, especially not the officer who ruined her future. Could this young black girl's extraordinary talent be enough to overcome a system determined to criminalize her very existence? Before we dive into this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from, and if you believe in justice for all, hit that like and subscribe button because tomorrow's special episode on medical discrimination is one you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Zora Williams was not your ordinary 17-year-old from the south side of Chicago. While other teens her age worried about prom dates and college applications, Zora had already skipped 3 grades and completed pre-med coursework that left university professors in awe. Her journey began at age 6 when she correctly diagnosed her grandmother's atrial fibrillation by simply listening to her heartbeat. By 14, she had published research on innovative surgical techniques in prestigious medical journals under mentorship programs for gifted students. Her extraordinary intellect and steady hands made her stand out, but in America, her brown skin often made her invisible in ways that mattered. Dr. Marcus Rivera, the pioneering chief of surgery at Mercy Hospital, recognized her exceptional talent during a citywide medical competition for high school students. While other hospital administrators questioned his decision to personally select a teenager for the prestigious surgical internship program, Dr. Rivera stood firm. Talent like hers comes once in a generation, he had argued during the contentious hospital board meeting. We would be fools to let racial biases prevent us from nurturing it. For Zora, each day was a delicate balancing act. She woke at 4 each morning to study medical texts, attended specialized classes until noon, then headed to the hospital for her internship hours. The standard white coat that hung from her slender frame carried both the weight of her dreams and the burden of others' doubts. Her mother, Denise, worked as a hospital custodian, often taking double shifts to support Zora's accelerated education. Their small apartment overflowed with medical textbooks instead of teenage memorabilia. "Remember," Denise would tell her daughter each morning as she adjusted Zora's perfectly pressed coat, "they'll try to tell you that you don't belong there, but you were born to heal." That fateful Tuesday morning began like any other. Zora arrived at Mercy Hospital an hour early, her backpack heavy with research materials for the complex bilateral lung transplant scheduled for later that day. Dr. Rivera had specifically requested her assistance, recognizing her unique perspective on the innovative procedure they would attempt. As she made her way through the hospital's gleaming lobby, security guard Thomas Reynolds stepped directly into her path. Despite the hospital ID badge prominently displayed around her neck, he scrutinized her with unconcealed suspicion. "Where do you think you're going?" he demanded, though he had seen her enter the building nearly every day for months. "ID check." Zora presented her credentials calmly, maintaining the professional demeanor Dr. Rivera had taught her was essential for black medical professionals who would always face extra scrutiny. Reynolds examined her badge with exaggerated care, turning it over multiple times as if expecting to find evidence of forgery. "This says you're a surgical intern. You're what, 15? 17, sir," Zora replied, her voice steady despite the familiar knot forming in her stomach. "I'm expected in pre-op conference in 10 minutes. Reynolds reluctantly handed back her badge, but proceeded to follow her through the corridors, staying just far enough behind to maintain deniability, but close enough that other staff noticed. Zora felt the weight of his gaze on her back as she tried to review her notes on the complex procedure ahead. What she didn't know as she finally reached the surgical wing was that this minor harassment was just the first ripple in a wave about to crash through her carefully constructed world. Officer Brandon Miller wasn't supposed to be stationed at Mercy Hospital that morning. His usual patrol was downtown, but a recent string of prescription drug thefts had the department allocating additional officers to hospital security. With 11 years on the force, Miller had accumulated 17 civilian complaints for excessive force and racial profiling, yet his personnel file remained spotless. Each incident had been carefully handled by superiors who considered him a good officer, despite troubling patterns in his behavior. The hospital assignment irritated him, a feeling he carried like ammunition as he stalked the sterile corridors. When Miller first spotted Zora in the surgical wing waiting area, she was deeply focused on medical charts spread across her lap. In her standard-issue scrubs, and with her hair pulled back in a practical bun, she looked to most like any other hospital staff member preparing for their shift. But to Miller, she was immediately suspicious, a black teenager who couldn't possibly have legitimate business in this restricted area. He watched her for several minutes, noting how she occasionally made notes in the margins of what appeared to be complex medical documents. His decision was made before he even approached her. "Hey, you!" Miller's voice boomed across the waiting area, causing several patients to look up in alarm. "What do you think you're doing here?" Zora glanced up from her charts, momentarily disoriented by the sudden interruption. "I'm reviewing patient files for a procedure that's scheduled in an hour, officer," she explained calmly, gesturing to her badge and the documents. Miller stepped closer, towering over her seated form. "Don't give me that. This is a restricted area for medical personnel only. You're loitering." "I am medical personnel," Zora replied, her voice remaining professional despite the quickening of her pulse. "I'm a surgical intern under Dr. Rivera." The officer's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Right, and I'm the Surgeon General. How stupid do you think I am?" He reached down and snatched the medical chart from her hands. "This is confidential patient information. You could be arrested for this." "Please be careful with that," Zora said, standing up. "That's for Congressman Wilson's procedure today, and I need to be prepared." "Congressman Wilson?" Miller's voice rose even higher. "Now you're really crossing a line, impersonating medical staff and accessing a VIP's records. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Zora felt her professional composure beginning to crack. "Officer, please check with Dr. Rivera. I'm supposed to assist him in less than an hour. This is a misunderstanding." Miller grabbed her wrist roughly. "The only misunderstanding is you thinking you can sit here pretending to be a doctor. Where'd you steal the scrubs from?" "The laundry." As he produced handcuffs, Zora noticed several nurses and a patient's family watching in shock. "I have every right to be here," she insisted, her voice finally breaking. "Check my credentials." "Call Dr. Rivera." "So shut up," Miller snapped, tightening the cuffs with unnecessary force. "You troublemakers are all the same. Always have some story, some excuse." The metal bit into her skin as he continued loudly, ensuring everyone nearby could hear. "You're under arrest for trespassing, impersonating medical personnel, and accessing confidential patient information." The assembled crowd in the waiting room watched in stunned silence as Officer Miller recited her rights while marching her toward the exit, the precious surgical notes scattered on the floor behind them. "So let me ask you, what would you have done in Zora's position? Comment number 1 if you think she should have been more assertive with the officer, or number 2 if you believe staying calm was her best option. If you're outraged by how quickly this young black prodigy was criminalized for simply existing in a space someone decided she didn't belong, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories exposing injustice in America. What do you think will happen when Dr. Rivera discovers his star intern has been handcuffed and accused of impersonating medical staff? Will anyone stand up for Zora before it's too late? The double doors of the surgical wing burst open as Dr. Marcus Rivera strode purposefully into the waiting area, his face darkening at the scene before him. Zora Williams, his most promising surgical intern, was being led away in handcuffs while essential preoperative notes lay scattered across the floor. "What the hell is going on here?" Rivera's authoritative voice cut through the murmurs of onlookers. Officer Miller turned, maintaining his grip on Zora's arm. "Hospital security matter, Doctor. This girl was caught impersonating hospital staff and accessing confidential files." "That girl is Zora Williams, a certified surgical intern in my program," Rivera countered, stepping closer. "Release her immediately. We have an emergency procedure scheduled in 40 minutes, and she's essential to my team." Miller's stance became defensive, his grip on Zora tightening. "With all due respect, Doctor, I caught her red-handed pretending to be medical staff. No teenager is performing surgery in this hospital." "Officer Miller," Rivera said, reading the nameplate, "I am the chief of surgery at this hospital. Ms. Williams has been part of our specialized internship program for gifted medical students for over a year. Now remove those handcuffs. We have a life to save." Miller's face flushed with embarrassment that quickly transformed to stubborn defiance. "Sounds to me like you're covering for this delinquent. I've seen her type before, Doctor. She probably conned you with some sob story." At that moment, the emergency doors slid open as a team of nurses rushed through, accompanying a gurney. On it lay Congressman Robert Wilson, his complexion ashen, an oxygen mask covering his face. The transplant had been moved up due to the congressman's rapidly deteriorating condition. "Code Blue team to pre-op 3. Code Blue to pre-op 3. The hospital announcement system blared. Dr. Rivera's attention immediately shifted to his patient. "That's our bilateral lung transplant patient. His condition has destabilized." He turned back to Miller. "Officer, remove those cuffs now. This is literally life or death." Before Miller could respond, Hospital Administrator Patricia Walsh rushed forward, her face tight with concern. "What's happening here, Dr. Rivera? The transplant team is waiting, and the donor organs have already been prepped." "Miss Walsh," Rivera gestured to Zora, "please explain to this officer that Ms. Williams is a legitimate member of our surgical team." Walsh assessed the situation quickly, her eyes darting between the congressman's gurney disappearing. Down the hall, the handcuffed intern and the increasingly belligerent officer. "Officer Miller, I can personally vouch for Ms. Williams. Please release her into our custody. This is an emergency situation." Miller hesitated, then grudgingly unlocked the cuffs. "This is temporary. I'll be filing paperwork on this incident. Regardless." As the cuffs came off, Zora immediately bent to gather her scattered notes, her wrists showing angry red marks from the tight restraints. "Dr. Rivera, I memorized the modified procedure you proposed, the perfusion technique for the damaged left lobe will need the specialized catheter." Rivera nodded, impressed despite the circumstances. "Ms. Walsh, please get Zora to scrub in immediately. We can sort this out after we save the congressman's life." Zora rushed toward the operating rooms, fighting back tears of humiliation and anger. In the surgical preparation area, she methodically scrubbed her hands while reciting the complex procedure steps in her mind, compartmentalizing the trauma of her arrest to focus on the task ahead. Inside Operating Room 3, the atmosphere was tense. The donor lungs had a limited viability window, and the congressman's condition was deteriorating rapidly. As Zora entered in full surgical attire, several team members looked surprised at her presence, having heard whispers about the incident in the waiting room. "Zora will be assisting with the specialized perfusion technique," Dr. Rivera announced firmly, silencing any potential comments. For the next 7 hours, Zora stood alongside Rivera, her knowledge of the innovative procedure proving invaluable. When complications arose with unexpected scar tissue in the left bronchial passage, it was Zora who suggested the modified approach that ultimately allowed the successful connection of the donor organ. Outside in the waiting area, Officer Miller had not left. Instead, he was completing arrest paperwork, convinced that the hospital administration was covering up for Zora's unauthorized presence. In his report, he detailed how he had caught a juvenile delinquent impersonating medical staff and accessing VIP patient records, emphasizing the potential security breach rather than any consideration that he might be mistaken. As the surgical team finally emerged from the operating room, exhausted but successful, Miller stepped forward with backup officers he had called. The congressman would live, thanks in no small part to Zora's assistance. But as Rivera began explaining the successful procedure to the waiting family members, Miller approached with handcuffs ready once more. "Zora Williams," he announced loudly, "you're under arrest for impersonating medical personnel and endangering a patient's life." The successful completion of Congressman Wilson's double lung transplant should have been a triumphant moment for the entire Mercy Hospital surgical team, especially for Zora Williams. Her quick thinking during a critical moment in the procedure had quite literally saved the congressman's life when an unexpected complication threatened the entire operation. As the surgical team exited the operating room after 7 grueling hours, the hallway should have witnessed congratulations and relief. Instead, it became the stage for Zora's public humiliation. "Step away from the medical staff, Officer Mace," Miller commanded, handcuffs ready as he approached Zora. "This girl has no authorization to be in an operating room." Dr. Rivera, still in his surgical gown, positioned himself between Miller and his intern. "This is outrageous, Ms. Williams." Just assisted in saving Congressman Wilson's life. Her presence was not only authorized, but essential. "Dr. Rivera," Miller responded coldly. "I've confirmed with hospital security that there is no record of any formal teenage internship program. She has no medical license, which means she just participated in surgery without legal qualification. That's a felony." Behind Rivera, the surgical team exchanged confused glances. The internship program was relatively new and not widely publicized due to its experimental nature, but it was fully authorized by the hospital board. "Officer Miller," the senior surgical nurse, Janet Cooper, stepped forward. "I've worked with Zora for months. She's more qualified than many first-year residents I've trained." Miller ignored her, producing a document from his pocket. "I have an arrest warrant for illegally practicing medicine without a license, identity fraud, and endangering the life of a federal official." Hospital security guards hovered uncertainly at the periphery, caught between respecting law enforcement and defending their own staff. "This is absurd," Dr. Rivera protested as Miller pushed past him. "Dr. Chen and I will testify that—" "Save it for court," Miller cut him off, grabbing Zora's arm and spinning her around. "Hands behind your back." For the second time that day, cold metal encircled Zora's wrists, biting into flesh already raw from the earlier restraints. This time, the handcuffs were applied in full view of the entire surgical team and several passing hospital staff. News travels quickly in hospitals. By the time Miller was leading Zora through the main corridor, dozens of staff members lined the route, watching in disbelief as the young woman who had just assisted in saving a congressman's life was paraded out like a dangerous criminal. Outside the hospital, a local news crew that had arrived to cover the congressman's surgery captured footage of Zora being placed in the back of a police cruiser, her surgical cap still on her head. Across town, Denise Williams was finishing her custodial shift at the community college when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Mercy Hospital, and she answered with a smile, expecting to hear her daughter's excited voice describing the groundbreaking surgery she had been scheduled to observe. Instead, she heard Dr. Rivera's grave tone explaining that Zora had been arrested. "Arrested? For what?" Denise's voice echoed in the empty classroom she had been cleaning. "There must be some mistake." "It's no mistake," Rivera responded, his voice tight with controlled anger. "An officer decided she couldn't possibly be a surgical intern because of her age and, I suspect, her race. We're trying to get her released now." By evening, local news channels were running the story, but with a troubling slant. "Teenage girl caught impersonating doctor at Mercy Hospital." The police department's version of events had reached the media first, framing Zora as a dangerous imposter rather than a legitimate intern. Social media exploded with conflicting narratives. Some called for her immediate release, citing racial profiling, while others questioned how a teenager could have accessed an operating room in the first place. The hashtag #YouFakeDocZora began trending locally, with users sharing the footage of her arrest without context. In juvenile detention, Zora sat alone in a holding cell, still wearing her surgical scrubs beneath an orange vest. Her requests to contact her mother or Dr. Rivera had been repeatedly delayed. Officer Miller had personally overseen her processing, ensuring that she was treated like any other dangerous offender. When Denise finally arrived at the detention center with Dr. Rivera, they were informed that Zora would remain in custody overnight pending a hearing the following morning. The charge sheet had grown to include resisting arrest and assaulting an officer, fabrications that Miller had added to strengthen the case. "My daughter has never been in trouble a day in her life," Denise protested to the intake officer. "She was assisting in life-saving surgery this morning." "Ma'am," the officer replied, barely looking up from his computer, "it says here she was impersonating medical personnel and compromised a VIP patient's care. The judge will sort it out tomorrow." As Denise and Dr. Rivera left the detention center defeated for the moment, local news vans were already setting up outside, preparing to cover the story of the teenage surgery imposter on the evening news. What they didn't yet know was that across town, Congressman Wilson was regaining consciousness, unaware that the young woman who had helped save his life was spending the night in a cell. What would you do if you saw someone being wrongfully arrested for simply existing in a space others thought they didn't belong in? Comment number 1, if you would intervene directly. Number 2, if you would record the incident as evidence. Or number 3, if you would immediately contact higher authorities. If you believe black excellence should be celebrated rather than criminalized, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Will anyone believe Zora's extraordinary story, or will Officer Miller's false narrative destroy her medical career before it even begins? And what will happen when Congressman Wilson learns that one of his surgical saviors is behind bars because of the color of her skin? The morning after Zora's arrest, Officer Brandon Miller arrived at Mercy Hospital not in uniform but in plain clothes. He moved with purpose through the administrative wing, bypassing the regular reception desk and heading straight for the office of Gerald Thompson, the hospital's chief administrative officer. Thompson, a cautious bureaucrat more concerned with the hospital's reputation than its ethical obligations, welcomed Miller with a handshake that betrayed his nervousness. "Officer Miller, I understand you're here to discuss the unfortunate incident with the Rivera intern." Miller sat without waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Thompson, this goes beyond an unfortunate incident. We have evidence that Dr. Rivera has been allowing an unqualified minor to participate in surgical procedures, potentially putting countless patients at risk." The word evidence was a calculated exaggeration, but Miller knew that fear was a powerful motivator. Thompson's face paled. "The internship program was approved by the board last year. Dr. Rivera assured us all participants were properly supervised. A 17-year-old performing surgery on a sitting congressman." Miller leaned forward. "The liability alone could bankrupt this hospital, not to mention the federal investigation that will follow." He let that sink in before continuing. "Unless, of course, Mercy Hospital takes immediate corrective action." Thompson understood the implied ultimatum. "What would constitute corrective action in your view, Officer Miller?" "For starters, immediate termination of this so-called internship program and a formal statement distancing the hospital from Ms. Williams' unauthorized activities." Thompson hesitated. "Dr. Rivera is our chief of surgery. His program has brought considerable prestige to Mercy, and considerable risk," Miller countered. "I wonder how your board would feel knowing you protected a doctor who endangered a congressman's life by allowing a teenager to assist in complex surgery." Within hours of this conversation, hospital security collected Zora's lab coat, ID badge, and personal items from her locker. An email went out to all department heads announcing the temporary suspension of the youth surgical internship program pending review. Dr. Rivera, arriving for his morning rounds, was met by 2 security guards who escorted him to Thompson's office. "What the hell is going on, Gerald?" Rivera demanded as the door closed behind him. Thompson avoided eye contact. "We've received anonymous complaints about your judgment in allowing the Williams girl to participate in surgical procedures." "Anonymous?" Rivera scoffed. "You mean Officer Miller, who's on a crusade to destroy a brilliant young woman's career because he can't admit he made a racist assumption?" "Marcus," Thompson replied, using Rivera's first name to soften what came next. "The board is concerned about potential liability. Until this is resolved, we're asking you to take administrative leave." "Administrative leave?" Rivera's voice rose in disbelief. "I just performed groundbreaking surgery that saved a congressman's life. Who's going to oversee his post-operative care?" "Dr. Chen will take over your cases temporarily." Thompson said, sliding a document across the desk. "This is just until the investigation concludes." In another part of the hospital, the recovery wing was abuzz with activity as Congressman Wilson's condition was closely monitored. His vital signs were stable, but he remained unconscious, the powerful anesthesia still working its way through his system. His wife, Catherine Wilson, maintained a vigil by his bedside, unaware of the drama unfolding throughout the hospital regarding the young intern who had played a crucial role in saving her husband's life. Across town, Zora's case was being processed through the juvenile justice system with unusual speed. Officer Miller had personally spoken with the district attorney's office, emphasizing the serious nature of the offenses and the high-profile victim. The DA, sensing a politically advantageous case, assigned one of her toughest prosecutors to handle the hearing. Meanwhile, at Zora's high school, administrators had been contacted by police and informed of her arrest. Despite the presumption of innocence, the principal placed Zora on immediate academic suspension, citing the severity of the allegations and concern for maintaining the school's reputation. The prestigious Wilson Scholarship Foundation, which had previously guaranteed Zora's future medical school funding, sent a terse email to Denise Williams. "In light of recent events, the foundation is withdrawing Ms. Williams' scholarship, offer pending the resolution of current legal matters." The systematic dismantling of Zora's carefully constructed future took less than 24 hours. By the time Officer Miller's shift ended that evening, he had effectively cut off every avenue of support for the young woman. What he hadn't anticipated was the quiet doubt growing in his partner's mind. Officer James Daniels had worked with Miller for 3 years and had witnessed his pattern of targeting young black men and women for minor infractions or imagined offenses. The case of Zora Williams, however, struck him as particularly egregious. While Miller celebrated his good police work with colleagues at a local bar, Daniels quietly researched the hospital's internship program, discovering that it was, in fact, fully authorized and had produced remarkable results with gifted students from diverse backgrounds. As night fell, Zora remained in juvenile detention, her future in medicine seemingly destroyed, while across the city, various forces were aligning either to bury her completely or to fight for her exoneration. Denise Williams had spent her entire life working within systems that were designed to exclude her. As a single mother, she had navigated housing discrimination, banking obstacles, and educational barriers to create opportunities for her daughter. The sight of Zora in detention orange, her brilliant mind caged by a system that refused to see her as anything but a threat, ignited something primal in Denise. "They picked the wrong mother to mess with," she whispered to Zora during their brief visitation period. "I'm coming back with reinforcements." Denise's first stop after leaving the detention center was not home, but the law office of Sarah Jackson, a civil rights attorney who had built her reputation dismantling cases of racial profiling and police misconduct. Jackson's modest office was located above a convenience store in a predominantly black neighborhood, its walls adorned with newspaper clippings of previous victories against powerful institutions. "Mrs. Williams," Jackson said after hearing Denise's frantic explanation, "what happened to your daughter is unfortunately common, but the stakes here are extraordinarily high. We're not just fighting for Zora's freedom, but for her future, and potentially the futures of many other black children with exceptional gifts." "What can we do?" Denise asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. "They've already suspended her from school and taken away her scholarship." "First," Jackson replied, opening her laptop, "we document everything. Then we start building our counter-narrative before Miller's version becomes the only story people know." While this meeting took place, Dr. Rivera was engaged in his own form of resistance. Barred from entering the hospital officially, he had called an emergency meeting of trusted colleagues at his home. "They want us to abandon Zora and pretend she never belonged among us," Rivera told the assembled group of doctors, nurses, and medical technicians who had worked with the young intern. "But we all witnessed her exceptional skills and dedication. We cannot allow talent like hers to be destroyed by one officer's prejudice." Senior surgical nurse Janet Cooper nodded firmly. I've kept detailed notes on every procedure Zora observed or assisted with. Her contributions have been significant and always properly supervised. Don't I have the security footage from yesterday?" added Michael Chen, a hospital IT specialist who had risked his job to secure the video before it could be conveniently lost in the system. It clearly shows Miller's aggressive behavior and Zora's professional demeanor. Rivera looked at the gathered allies with determination. "We need to collect all evidence of Zora's legitimate role at the hospital before records start disappearing. Testimonials, documentation, performance, reviews, everything." Across town, Officer James Daniels sat in his car outside Attorney Sarah Jackson's office, wrestling with his conscience. The folder on the passenger seat contained copies of previous civilian complaints against Miller that had mysteriously disappeared from the official record. Coming forward would likely end his career in law enforcement, but remaining silent would make him complicit in the destruction of a young woman's future. After 20 minutes of internal debate, Daniels grabbed the folder and entered the building. Meanwhile, Zora's first court appearance was scheduled for the following morning. The judge assigned to the case, Howard Simmons, had a reputation for harsh sentences and close ties to the police union. The state prosecutor had prepared an aggressive case, adding charges of obstruction of medical services to the growing list of alleged offenses. This additional charge carried potential felony implications, which could permanently bar Zora from any future medical career, even if she were eventually exonerated. The systematic effort to crush Zora Williams was proceeding with terrifying efficiency, but so too was the resistance gathering to defend her. As dawn broke on the day of the hearing, two separate groups prepared their strategies. One to make an example of a young black woman who dared to excel in spaces traditionally closed to her, and another to ensure her brilliance would not be extinguished by prejudice and fear. What would you do if you saw someone you knew was innocent being systematically destroyed by a corrupt system? Comment number 1, if you'd risk your own security to stand up for them. Number 2, if you'd work behind the scenes to gather evidence. Or number 3, if you'd focus on building public support and awareness. If you believe that extraordinary talent deserves protection regardless of race or background, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more stories of justice and resilience. Will Zora's allies be able to gather enough evidence before her hearing to counter Officer Miller's fabricated charges? Or will the system succeed in making an example of her, sending a chilling message to other young black prodigies who dare to reach beyond the limitations society tries to impose on them? By the morning of Zora's hearing, the story had exploded across local news networks. The initial coverage, heavily influenced by the police department's press release, portrayed her as a dangerous imposter who had somehow infiltrated a hospital's surgical team and endangered a congressman's life. "Teen surgery scam" blared the headline on Channel 7's morning broadcast, accompanied by Zora's school photograph beside a grainy still from the security footage showing her being led away in handcuffs. Sources within Mercy Hospital confirm no authorization was given for a minor to participate in medical procedures, the anchor intoned gravely, despite the statement's factual inaccuracy. The police union had mobilized quickly, sending spokesperson Detective Frank Morrison to every morning show that would have him. "This case highlights the vital role our officers play in protecting vulnerable patients," Morrison stated on Good Morning Chicago. Officer Miller's vigilance potentially prevented a tragedy. At the courthouse, a small but vocal group of police supporters gathered, holding signs reading "Back the Blue" and "Protect our hospitals from frauds." Their presence ensured that cameras had dramatic visuals to accompany the story. Inside the courthouse, Zora sat beside Attorney Sarah Jackson, her school uniform replacing the detention center garb in an attempt to remind the court of her youth and academic standing. Denise Williams sat directly behind them, her back rigid, with tension, as reporters sketched her daughter's profile for the afternoon editions. In a strategic move, Jackson had filed a motion to open the juvenile proceedings to the public, betting that transparency would ultimately benefit their case more than the privacy typically afforded to minors. They want to try her as an adult. In the court of public opinion, Jackson had explained to Denise, but shield the proceedings from scrutiny. We can't allow that." As they awaited the judge's arrival, Zora's phone buzzed with notifications despite being set to silent mode. The hashtag #TheJarkofFakeDocZora was trending nationally now, with thousands sharing uninformed opinions about a case they knew only through sensationalized headlines. "Don't look at social media," Jackson advised, placing her hand over Zora's phone. "What matters is what happens in this courtroom, and what those who know you believe." But the online narrative was increasingly difficult to ignore. Hospital administration, under pressure to protect their reputation, had released a carefully worded statement that neither confirmed Zora's legitimate role nor explicitly denied. Twice Mercy Hospital is cooperating fully with authorities regarding unauthorized access to sensitive areas and patient information. Patient safety remains our highest priority. This strategic ambiguity further fueled speculation about Zora's actions and intentions. Dr. Rivera, prevented from entering the hospital or accessing his patient records, found himself under digital attack as well. Anonymous accounts questioned his judgment, credentials, and even suggested inappropriate relationships with the teenage intern. The hospital board, concerned about potential liability, remained silent rather than defending their chief of surgery. "Your silence is complicity," Rivera had shouted during an emergency phone call with board members before they unanimously voted to extend his administrative leave indefinitely. The coordinated pressure campaign extended to Zora's academic life as well. Parent groups at her elite high school circulated a petition demanding her permanent expulsion, citing concerns about the school's reputation and the character of the student body. Teachers who attempted to defend her academic brilliance were warned about making public statements during an ongoing investigation. By midday, the courtroom was packed with journalists, police union representatives, hospital administrators, and a small group of Zora's supporters. The systematic effort to isolate her was working. Many who privately believed in her innocence feared the professional and personal consequences of publicly standing against the powerful coalition aligned against her. Outside the courthouse, the protest had grown, with opposing groups now facing off across the street from each other. A small but passionate contingent of medical students from nearby universities held signs reading, "Believe Black Excellence," and "Medical Knowledge, Criminal Intent," while police supporters responded with chants about law and order. Local news cameras captured the growing tension, focusing particularly on the most aggressive participants to maximize viewer engagement. Inside, Judge Simmons entered the courtroom, his expression revealing nothing about his predisposition for the case. As the proceedings began, the prosecutor approached the bench with a thick folder of evidence compiled largely from Officer Miller's reports. Meanwhile, Sarah Jackson exchanged glances with Officer Daniels, who sat nervously at the back of the courtroom, the folder containing proof of Miller's history of racial profiling heavy in his hands. The first day of what would become a media spectacle was underway, with Zora's future hanging in the balance. 3 days into Zora's hearing, an unexpected development shook the foundation of the case against her. Congressman Robert Wilson, the very man whose life had been saved by the surgical team Zora assisted, regained full consciousness following his complex bilateral lung transplant. His first coherent question to the medical staff, after asking about his own condition, took everyone by surprise. "Where is the young lady who helped Dr. Rivera with the new perfusion technique?" The nurse on duty, a temporary replacement, unfamiliar with the recent drama, simply replied that she would check, unknowingly setting in motion a chain of events that would transform the case. Catherine Wilson, who had maintained a constant vigil by her husband's bedside, immediately noted the congressman's question. "What young lady, Robert? I thought Dr. Rivera and Dr. Chen performed your surgery." The congressman, still weak but mentally alert, described brief moments of awareness during the preoperative preparation when he had observed a young African-American woman confidently discussing surgical approaches with Dr. Rivera. "Rivera called her his protege," Wilson recalled, "said she had discovered refinements to the perfusion technique that might save my left lung rather than sacrificing it." Catherine Wilson, a former prosecutor herself before entering politics alongside her husband, immediately sensed the significance of this recollection. When a hospital administrator arrived to check on the VIP patient, she demanded a full explanation of the young lady her husband had mentioned. The administrator's uncomfortable evasion only intensified her suspicion that something was being concealed. "I want to speak with Dr. Rivera," she insisted. "Immediately." The administrator hesitated. "Dr. Rivera is currently on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. Dr. Chen has assumed responsibility for the congressman's care." "Administrative leave? For saving my husband's life?" Catherine's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to cutting through bureaucratic obfuscation. "I want a full explanation within the hour, or I'll have the congressman's chief of staff contact the hospital board directly." News of the congressman's interest in Zora's case spread through the hospital like wildfire. Staff who had been intimidated into silence began whispering among themselves, sharing their own observations of Zora's exceptional abilities and professional conduct. The hospital board, already nervous about potential liability, now faced a new dilemma. Continuing to distance themselves from Zora might anger one of the most powerful patients in their care. An emergency board meeting was convened via conference call, with members divided on how to proceed. "If we publicly support the girl now, we're admitting we allowed a teenager to participate in high-risk surgery," argued one board member. "The liability exposure would be enormous." "And if we don't," countered another, "we're potentially alienating a sitting congressman whose influence affects our federal funding." Hospital legal counsel weighed in. "Our position should be that Ms. Williams was an authorized observer in a legitimate educational program, but never performed actual surgical procedures unsupervised." This carefully crafted half-truth would become the official position, though it significantly downplayed Zora's actual contributions. Across town, Officer Miller was growing increasingly concerned about the shifting narrative. The story had expanded beyond his control, with new voices questioning his version of events. In response, he intensified his efforts, convincing fellow officers to post anonymous comments on news articles attacking Zora's character and suggesting she had manipulated hospital staff. The police union spokesperson doubled down as well, giving interviews suggesting that certain political elements were trying to undermine legitimate law enforcement to protect a fraudster because of her race. Officer Miller acted exactly as trained, identifying suspicious activity and protecting vulnerable patients, the spokesperson insisted on an afternoon talk show. "The attempt to paint this as racial profiling is offensive to the dedicated men and women of our police force." But the Wilsons were not easily intimidated. Catherine Wilson, using her considerable network, began making inquiries about Zora Williams, discovering her exceptional academic record, published research papers, and the now suspended scholarship that had promised to fund her medical education. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that a grave injustice was unfolding. That evening, as Zora and her mother returned home from another exhausting day in court, they found an unexpected visitor waiting, Catherine Wilson herself, accompanied by the congressman's chief of staff. "Ms. Williams," Catherine said, extending her hand to a stunned Denise, "I believe we need to discuss how my husband's life was saved by your daughter and why she's now fighting for her future instead of being celebrated for her extraordinary gifts." Inside the Williams' modest apartment, Catherine listened intently as Zora explained the specialized perfusion technique she had researched and proposed to Dr. Rivera, which had ultimately preserved lung tissue that conventional approaches would have sacrificed. The congressman's wife, impressed by Zora's clear expertise and professional demeanor, made a decision that would change everything. "Tomorrow," she announced, "the congressman would like to make a statement about your role in his care. With your permission, of course." As Catherine Wilson was leaving, she made one final comment that gave Zora her first real hope in days. "They've offered us a deal, you know. Drop all of this. Get your scholarship back. Pretend it never happened." The young prodigy looked up, surprised. "What did you say?" Catherine smiled grimly. "I told them that in America, we don't solve injustice with silence, we solve it with truth. Do you believe that powerful connections should be necessary for justice to prevail in America? Comment number 1, if you think the system should work equally for everyone regardless of who they know. Or number 2, if you think it's just the reality that influence matters in achieving justice. If you believe that talent and dedication should be recognized regardless of age or race, show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate extraordinary achievement. Will the congressman's support be enough to turn the tide against the forces aligned against Zora? Or will Officer Miller find new ways to retaliate against everyone who dares to challenge his authority? And what will happen when Zora must decide between accepting a quiet deal that restores her future or fighting for public vindication that might help others facing similar injustice? The morning after Catherine Wilson's visit, Zora sat across from Sarah Jackson in the attorney's conference room. The offer on the table was tempting in its simplicity. Drop all allegations against Officer Miller, sign a non-disclosure agreement, and in return all charges would be dismissed, her scholarship reinstated, and her position at the hospital preserved. It's a good deal, Jackson admitted reluctantly. You'd get your future back, Zora. Denise Williams, who had taken unpaid leave from her job to support her daughter, looked conflicted. Baby, I want you to have every opportunity you deserve, but this decision has to be yours. Zora stared at the document, its legal language, obscuring the fundamental bargain, her silence in exchange for her future. The phone on the conference table rang, interrupting her thoughts. Ms. Jackson, Congressman Wilson is on line 1 for Zora. The attorney raised her eyebrows in surprise before passing the phone to her young client. Zora Williams? The congressman's voice was weaker than she'd expected, but his words were clear. I understand they've offered you a deal. Yes, sir, Zora replied, straightening instinctively, though he couldn't see her. They want me to sign an NDA and drop any complaints against Officer Miller. Let me tell you something I've learned in 20 years of public service, Wilson continued. Systems don't change when good people accept private justice. They change when brave people demand public accountability. After a brief pause, he added, Whatever you decide, my wife and I will support you. But know this, there are other young people like you who may never get the chance you did if these patterns continue unchallenged. After the call ended, Zora looked up at her mother and attorney with newfound resolve. I'm not signing, she announced. What happened to me will happen to someone else if nothing changes. Jackson nodded with approval. Then we fight. News of Zora's rejection of the settlement offer reached Officer Miller by midday. His initial satisfaction at having orchestrated the powerful pressure campaign against her quickly turned to rage upon learning that not only had she refused the deal, but that Congressman Wilson intended to make a public statement supporting her. Miller's captain called him into his office that afternoon, closing the door for privacy. This is getting complicated, Brandon, he said without preamble. The department is getting calls from the mayor's office about your handling of the hospital arrest. Miller stiffened defensively. I followed procedure. The girl was impersonating medical staff. Maybe, the captain conceded, but now we've got a congressman involved. The chief wants us to distance ourselves from this. Distance? Ourselves? Miller repeated incredulously. After all the support from the union, after the press conferences backing my actions. The captain looked uncomfortable. Politics, Brandon. Nobody wants to be on the wrong side of a congressman. As Miller left the station that evening, his sense of betrayal hardened into determination. If the department wouldn't stand behind him, he would ensure Zora Williams paid a higher price. He made 2 calls from his personal phone, one to a former academy classmate now working as a security consultant for Mercy Hospital, and another to a contact at the State Medical Licensing Board. While Miller was mobilizing his counterattack, Zora's academic future was collapsing. Her high school principal, under pressure from influential parents, had converted her temporary suspension to an indefinite expulsion pending the resolution of all criminal charges. The specialized pre-med program that had accelerated her education notified her that her position had been given to another student due to her extended absence. Each carefully constructed element of her path to medicine was being systematically dismantled. Most devastating of all was the news that came the next morning. Dr. Rivera had been suspended by the State Medical Board pending an investigation into his judgment and fitness to practice medicine. The complaint, filed anonymously but clearly, orchestrated by Miller, cited reckless endangerment of patients by allowing unqualified individuals to participate in surgical procedures. Without Dr. Rivera's mentorship and the hospital internship, Zora's unique educational pathway was effectively destroyed. That same afternoon, Denise Williams returned home from a meeting with her supervisor to find a termination notice waiting. After 15 years of spotless service as a hospital custodian, she had been fired for violation of confidentiality protocols, a transparent excuse to eliminate another support from Zora's life. As mother and daughter sat at their kitchen table that evening, surrounded by unpaid bills and court documents, the weight of their situation bore down upon them. Their savings, already stretched thin to support Zora's accelerated education, would cover perhaps 2 more months of rent before they faced eviction. "They're trying to break us," Denise said softly, reaching for her daughter's hand. "They want us to regret ever challenging them." Zora, who had maintained remarkable composure throughout the ordeal, finally broke down. "Maybe I should just sign the deal," she whispered through tears. "I can't watch them destroy your life too." Denise squeezed her daughter's hand firmly. "My life has always been about making sure you could reach heights I never could. Don't you dare give up now." The doorbell rang unexpectedly, interrupting their conversation. Outside stood Catherine Wilson, accompanied by a woman Zora recognized immediately from medical journals, Dr. Josephine Baxter, founder of the renowned Baxter Institute for Medical Innovation. "Ms. Williams," Dr. Baxter said, extending her hand, "I'd like to discuss your future." For the first time in weeks, a fragile hope flickered in Zora's eyes. Officer James Daniels had been wrestling with his conscience since the day of Zora's arrest. As Miller's partner for 3 years, he had witnessed a disturbing pattern of harassment directed at young people of color, but had always rationalized his silence as professional loyalty. The Williams case, however, had pushed him past his breaking point. Late one evening, after confirming that the precinct was nearly empty, Daniels accessed the department's digital record system using Miller's login credentials, a violation that could end his career. For hours, he meticulously searched through Miller's arrest history, compiling a damning record of racial profiling that had been systematically concealed through administrative maneuvering. 17 previous complaints for excessive force against black suspects had been filed against Miller. Each had mysteriously disappeared from his official record through various procedural technicalities. In several cases, the complainants had suddenly withdrawn their allegations after experiencing unexpected legal troubles of their own. The pattern was unmistakable once assembled. Miller had been targeting young people of color for years, and the department had protected him at every turn. At 2:13 a.m., Daniels downloaded the complete record onto a secure drive. As he was preparing to leave, he heard footsteps in the hallway outside the records room. Quickly minimizing the screen, he pretended to be completing routine paperwork when the night sergeant peered in. "Working late, Daniels?" "Just catching up on reports, Sarge," he replied casually, heart pounding. "Miller likes them filed a certain way." The sergeant nodded and continued his rounds. Daniels waited until he was gone before logging out. The incriminating files securely copied. He would have only one chance to use them effectively. The next morning, Sarah Jackson received an unmarked envelope containing a thumb drive and a brief note. "Miller's real record. Use carefully. Source must remain anonymous." The evidence presented a legal and ethical dilemma. The files had clearly been obtained without proper authorization, potentially making them inadmissible in court. However, they provided critical context for Miller's actions against Zora and could lead investigators to examine official records more thoroughly. After consulting with Zora and Denise, Jackson made a decision. She would not use the illegally obtained files directly, but would use the information to guide her formal discovery requests in the civil rights lawsuit they were preparing. Meanwhile, at Mercy Hospital, another act of conscience was unfolding. Patricia Walsh, the hospital administrator who had initially helped free Zora during the surgery crisis, had been troubled by her own participation in the subsequent cover-up. Against explicit instructions from hospital legal counsel, she began reviewing all documentation related to the youth internship program, discovering that the hospital board had not only approved the program, but had celebrated it in their annual report to stakeholders just 3 months earlier. "I can't do this anymore," Walsh confided to a trusted colleague in the staff break room. "We're throwing this brilliant young woman under the bus to protect ourselves from liability." Her colleague glanced around nervously. "Be careful. Patricia, Thompson has already fired 3 people for leaking information about this case." Walsh straightened her lab coat resolutely. "Then he'll have to fire me too. I've scheduled a meeting with Sarah Jackson this afternoon." Across town, the State Medical Board was convening to discuss Dr. Rivera's case. What should have been a routine administrative review had been accelerated and escalated through pressure from unnamed law enforcement sources. Board member Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who knew Rivera personally, raised concerns about the unusual handling of the case. "We haven't even interviewed Dr. Rivera or reviewed the actual surgical outcomes," she pointed out. "The congressman's procedure was by all accounts successful, with exceptional post-operative recovery. Why are we rushing to judgment?" The board chairman shifted uncomfortably. "There have been inquiries from influential parties concerned about liability and public perception." "Influential parties?" Dr. Chen repeated skeptically. "You mean people worried about a lawsuit if we admit a black teenager was legitimately part of a surgical team?" Her direct confrontation sent a ripple of discomfort through the room. The political nature of the proceedings was supposed to remain unspoken. While various authorities worked to contain and control the narrative, Congressman Wilson was preparing for his first public appearance since the surgery. Against his doctor's advice, he had scheduled a press conference outside Mercy Hospital, strategically choosing the location to underscore the connection between his recovery and the facility, now embroiled in controversy. Catherine Wilson had arranged for Zora to be present, though not speaking, positioning her visibly among the medical professionals who had contributed to her husband's care. As news cameras assembled and reporters speculated about the congressman's statement, Officer Miller watched the coverage from his living room, the remote crushed in his white-knuckled grip. His carefully constructed case was beginning to unravel, thread by thread, as courageous individuals chose truth over security. What Miller didn't yet know was that the most damaging evidence was still emerging. A patient in the waiting room on the day of Zora's arrest had recorded the entire interaction on her phone, capturing Miller's aggressive approach, racial innuendos, and physical roughness in unedited clarity. The video, initially withheld out of fear of police retaliation, had just been anonymously uploaded to social media platforms with the hashtag #TruthForZora. The Montgomery County Courthouse had never seen such crowds. By 7 a.m., 3 hours before Zora's hearing was scheduled to begin, the line to enter the public gallery stretched around the block. News vans from national networks had displaced. Local media and satellite trucks crowded the adjacent parking lot. Congressman Wilson's public defense of Zora had transformed a local controversy into a national conversation about race, medicine, and justice. Inside the courthouse, Sarah Jackson made final preparations with her expanded legal team, which now included 2 prominent civil rights attorneys who had offered their services pro bono after learning of the case. Zora sat quietly between her mother and Catherine Wilson, her hands folded in her lap, her face a careful mask of composure despite the storm raging around her. Judge Simmons entered the courtroom at precisely 10 a.m., his demeanor noticeably different from previous sessions. The national attention had raised the stakes considerably, and even a judge with his strong law enforcement ties understood that his handling of the case would be scrutinized far beyond local circles. "Before we proceed," he announced after the formalities, "I wish to address several motions filed by both sides regarding new evidence." The prosecutor, Michael Reynolds, rose immediately. "Your Honor, we move to exclude any reference to the illegally obtained personnel records and the video recording, which was not properly entered into evidence during discovery." Sarah Jackson countered, "Your Honor, the video in question was submitted to the court within the discovery timeframe. As for Officer Miller's history, We are not introducing the specific records referenced, but rather the official complaints that are a matter of public record. The legal sparring continued for nearly an hour before Judge Simmons ruled, allowing the video, but limiting questioning about Miller's previous complaints. With the parameters established, Officer Brandon Miller was called to the stand. Impeccably. Dressed in his formal uniform adorned with commendation pins, Miller projected confidence as he was sworn in. Under the prosecutor's friendly questioning, he recounted his version of events, spotting a suspicious teenager with hospital documents, investigating appropriately, and acting to protect patient safety when she couldn't produce proper credentials. "And at what point did you determine Ms. Williams was impersonating medical personnel?" Reynolds asked. "When she claimed to be part of the surgical team for a congressman," Miller replied smoothly. "It was clearly implausible that a teenager would be performing surgery on a federal official." When Sarah Jackson rose for cross-examination, the atmosphere in the courtroom tensed perceptibly. "Officer Miller," she began, "prior to approaching Ms. Williams, did you ask any hospital staff about her presence?" "No, I identified a security threat and acted accordingly." "Did you contact her listed supervisor, Dr. Rivera, whose name was clearly printed on her ID badge?" "There wasn't time for a simple yes or no, officer." "No," Jackson approached the evidence table. "I'd like to play Exhibit 14, the waiting room video." As the recording played on courtroom screens, Miller's confident demeanor began to crack. The unedited footage showed him approaching Zora aggressively, dismissing her attempts to explain, and using unnecessary force while making comments. "Like people like you always have excuses, and I know a fake when I see one." When the lights came back up, Jackson continued. "Officer Miller, at any point in that interaction, did Ms. Williams resist you or act aggressively?" "Not physically, but her attitude was—" "Her attitude," Jackson interrupted, "is attitude grounds for arrest in this jurisdiction." The questioning continued relentlessly, exposing contradictions between Miller's report and the video evidence, between his claimed concerns for patient safety and his refusal to verify Zora's status, between his training requirements and his actual conduct. By the time Jackson finished, Miller's testimony had been methodically dismantled. The prosecution attempted to recover with testimony from hospital security personnel, but their accounts were undermined by Patricia Walsh, who testified about the hospital's authorized internship program and her direct knowledge of Zora's legitimate role. "Ms. Williams was not only permitted to be in that waiting area," Walsh stated firmly, "she was required to be there as part of her pre-surgical preparation responsibilities." The most dramatic moment came when Dr. Marcus Rivera took the stand, having been cleared by the medical board just days earlier, after a thorough review found no violations of protocol or patient safety. "Dr. Rivera," Jackson asked, "please explain Ms. Williams's role in Congressman Wilson's surgery." Rivera sat forward earnestly. "Zora Williams is the most gifted medical mind I've encountered in 30 years of teaching. The modified perfusion technique used in the congressman's surgery was based on her research and insights. Without her contribution, we would have been forced to sacrifice significant lung tissue, reducing his long-term prognosis substantially." And was her participation properly authorized? At every level, the internship program was approved by the hospital board, the medical ethics committee, and the state board of education. Every procedure she observed or assisted with was fully supervised and documented. As the day's testimony concluded, a commotion at the courtroom doors drew attention. Congressman Robert Wilson, still pale but standing unassisted, entered with his security detail. Judge Simmons immediately called for order, as whispers swept through the gallery. "Your Honor," the congressman's attorney addressed the court, "Congressman Wilson respectfully requests the opportunity to provide testimony relevant to these proceedings." Though highly unusual, the judge granted the request, scheduling the congressman's testimony for the following morning. Outside the courthouse, Officer Miller brushed past reporters without comment, his face tight with suppressed rage, as the case he had built so carefully continued to collapse around him. The final day of Zora Williams' hearing dawned with a sense of anticipation that extended far beyond the Montgomery County Courthouse. What had begun as a local case of alleged impersonation had evolved into a national referendum on racial bias in medicine, education, and law enforcement. The courtroom fell silent as Congressman Robert Wilson was called to testify, his physical presence still bearing the marks of his recent surgery, but his voice strong and deliberate. "Congressman Wilson," Sarah Jackson began after preliminary questions, "please tell the court what you remember about Ms. Williams's involvement in your care." Wilson turned slightly to address the judge directly. "I was conscious during portions of my preoperative preparation. I distinctly remember a young woman discussing a modified surgical approach with Dr. Rivera. When I asked who she was, he introduced her as Zora Williams, his intern and the architect of an innovative perfusion technique they would be using to preserve more of my lung tissue." "And what was your impression of Ms. Williams?" Jackson continued. "I was impressed by her knowledge, her confidence, and her compassion," Wilson replied. "She explained the procedure in terms I could understand, addressing my concerns with remarkable clarity for someone of any age, let alone 17. One final question, Congressman. How has your recovery progressed with the surgical technique Ms. Williams contributed to?" Wilson smiled slightly. "My doctors tell me I've regained 30% more lung function than expected with conventional approaches. The technique she helped develop didn't just save my life, it gave me back its quality." The prosecutor declined to cross-examine, recognizing the futility of challenging a sympathetic congressman's testimony. Judge Simmons called a brief recess before closing arguments, during which he summoned both legal teams to his chambers, an unusual move that prompted speculation throughout the courthouse. Inside the judge's private chambers, Simmons addressed the attorneys with uncharacteristic frankness. "This case has moved well beyond a simple determination of Ms. Williams' actions. Whatever ruling I make will be scrutinized as a statement on larger social issues." He looked directly at Prosecutor Reynolds. "The state has built its case on Officer Miller's testimony, which has been substantially contradicted by video evidence and witness accounts. I'm giving you an opportunity to reconsider your position before closing arguments." Reynolds glanced at his notes uncertainly. "Your Honor, given the sensitivity of this matter, I would like to request a brief continuance to consult with the District Attorney's Office." The judge granted a 1-hour recess, during which frantic phone calls between the courthouse and various officials resulted in a dramatic shift. When court reconvened, Reynolds rose with visible discomfort. "Your Honor, after careful review of the evidence presented, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Zora Williams in the interest of justice." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by scattered applause that the judge quickly silenced with his gavel. "Motion granted," Simmons declared. "Ms. Williams, you are free to go with the court's apologies for your ordeal." The formal vindication of Zora Williams marked the beginning, not the end, of the case's impact. In the days that followed, the consequences spread in widening circles. Officer Brandon Miller was placed on administrative leave, pending a comprehensive review of his arrest history and conduct. The internal affairs investigation, initially perfunctory, gained momentum as other officers, inspired by Daniel's courage, came forward with accounts of Miller's pattern of racial profiling. The police department, facing intense public scrutiny, announced a comprehensive review of its training, complaint procedures, and disciplinary processes. Chief James Harrison, speaking at a press conference alongside community leaders, acknowledged systemic failures that allowed individual bias to go unchecked and committed to structural reforms. Mercy Hospital reinstated the youth internship program with expanded funding and broader outreach to underrepresented communities. Dr. Rivera resumed his position as Chief of Surgery with a formal apology from the board and a mandate to develop additional programs supporting diversity in medical education. Most significantly, Congressman Wilson announced the establishment of the Williams-Rivera Scholarship Fund, a $10 million endowment to support gifted minority students pursuing careers in medicine. Today we recognize that excellence can emerge from unexpected places, and our institutions must evolve to nurture talent wherever it appears, Wilson stated at the launch event, with Zora and Dr. Rivera by his side. For Zora herself, The path forward included unprecedented opportunities. 3 prestigious medical schools offered full scholarships, competing to recruit the young prodigy whose name had become synonymous with persistence against prejudice. The traumatic experience had not diminished her passion for medicine, but had broadened her vision of what her career might encompass. "I still want to be a surgeon," she explained in her first public interview. "But now, I also want to help reform the systems that almost prevented me from becoming one." The most profound moment of Zora's journey came 6 months after her exoneration in an operating room at Mercy Hospital. Officer Miller's mother, Margaret, had been diagnosed with an aggressive aortic aneurysm requiring emergency surgery. The case was assigned to Dr. Rivera's team based on expertise, not connection, and it was only when reviewing the patient information that Zora recognized the name. "We should recuse ourselves," Rivera suggested, understanding the complexity of the situation. "No," Zora replied after careful consideration. "This is exactly why I wanted to become a doctor, to help people regardless of who they are or what they've done." Margaret Miller survived the 8-hour procedure thanks to another innovative approach Zora had helped develop. When she awoke from anesthesia, the first face she saw was that of the young woman her son had tried to destroy. "You're Dr. Williams?" she asked weakly, recognizing Zora from news coverage. "Not yet," Zora replied with gentle honesty. "But someday soon." The elderly woman reached for Zora's hand. "My son was wrong about you," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Zora squeezed her hand in return. "Your surgery went perfectly. You're going to be fine." As she left the recovery room, Zora passed Officer Miller in the hallway. Their eyes met briefly, his filled with complex emotions, hers with the steady compassion of a natural healer. No words were exchanged, but something fundamental had shifted. The system that had almost crushed Zora's extraordinary gift had itself been transformed by her resilience, creating space for other brilliant minds facing similar barriers. The true miracle wasn't just that Zora Williams had survived her ordeal, but that through it, she had helped create a world where the next young prodigy might not have to fight so hard to be recognized for their talent rather than judged by their appearance. Zora's story teaches us that excellence knows no age, race, or circumstance. It reminds us that systems designed to maintain the status quo will often resist extraordinary talent that doesn't fit predetermined expectations. The prejudice Zora faced wasn't just about her age or race, but about challenging assumptions of who belongs in prestigious spaces. The true measure of justice isn't merely punishing wrongdoing, but transforming systems to prevent future harm. Officer Miller's individual bias reflected broader institutional failures that required collective courage to address. We learn that allies can emerge from unexpected places. A congressman, a conflicted police officer, a hospital administrator, reminding us that moral courage often transcends professional allegiance or political identity. Perhaps most powerfully, Zora's decision to treat Officer Miller's mother demonstrates that true healing extends beyond the operating room. By choosing compassion over retribution, she embodied the highest ideals of medicine, while proving that breaking cycles of prejudice sometimes requires extraordinary grace from those who've been most harmed. Her journey shows us that justice, like healing, isn't just about repairing damage, but creating something stronger and more resilient in its place. What moments in your life have you been judged not for your abilities, but for how you looked or your age? Have you ever had to fight to be recognized for your talents when others couldn't see past their preconceptions? Share your experiences in the comments below. If Zora's journey resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge prejudice and celebrate extraordinary resilience against overwhelming odds. Which character in this story did you connect with most, and why? Let us know in the comments. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story of talent, injustice, and transformation. Remember, excellence deserves recognition regardless of its package.